Hello everyone, in this video I would like to examine Ubik, who showed Griffith a vision and served as a key trigger for his reincarnation, in two parts. Using the origin of his name and what is depicted in the work as clues, we will uncover the true identity of Ubik, who does not appear very often. Let's get started. In a previous video in which I discussed Slan, I said that the names of the God Hand, except for Void and Femto, are taken from science fiction novels. Ubik is without doubt derived from Ubik by Philip K. Dick, a master of science fiction. First, let me briefly explain the novel Ubik. In the world of Ubik, unlike our own, psychics exist openly. In addition to telepaths who read minds and precogs who foresee the future, there are people called inactives who can nullify their powers. These psychics are employed for privacy protection and for countering industrial espionage. Furthermore, in this world, there are beings called half-lives who are placed in cryogenic storage after death and can communicate with visitors through a device. Psychics begin to vanish one after another, and as the investigation follows the case, that is the outline of the story. I will omit the details, but an intriguing phenomenon begins to occur in the novel. It is called time regression. Cigarettes crumble the moment you try to smoke them. The coffee you ordered grows mold, and the money in your hand turns into currency that circulated 40 years ago. Vehicles change into older and older models. The only thing that can stop this time regression is a mysterious spray can called Ubik. Sounds interesting, right? Trying to do something about this time regression is the core of the story. According to the words of the author introduced in the afterword, for humankind, awakening is, so to speak, the coming of spring, the abandonment of the entropic process, and new life is, in some cases, a complete metamorphosis. It is hard to grasp, isn't it? I don't fully understand it either. Let me try to explain. Please keep in mind that we are discussing BERSERK here. Entropy is a term in physics that expresses the degree of disorder. When entropy is high, the degree of disorder is high. In other words, the level of chaos is extreme. Conversely, when entropy is low, the state has order and harmony. In other words, within Ubik, from the highly entropic, disorderly state called time regression, people attempt to restore their original sense of time and regain order by using the spray can named Ubik. As the afterword suggests, beyond the dualism of order and disorder lies the complete transformation of humankind. This evokes what came after the world shifted into Fantasia by the great roar of the astral world. That is, the world becoming chaotic. It suggests a departure from a linear worldview of order versus disorder. Knowing that Miura loved science fiction and even used such names for characters, he surely read Ubik. If we consider this novel as an inspiration for BERSERK, it is plausible that the image of chaos, confusion, or a being beyond even that standard was added to Ubik's characterization. In Volume 34, when the world shifts into Fantasia by the great roar of the astral world, creatures that had existed in the astral world appear in reality. At that time, double-page spreads depict what you might call emblematic images for each member of the God Hand other than Femto. This expression connects to Volume 26, where Slan, when asked by the Skull Knight, "Are you the only one summoned?" says, "I don't know about the others. They are all melted into their favorite station, Saphira, and are drifting without form." I suspect that those members of the God Hand who had melted into their favorite Saphira likewise manifested in reality due to the great roar of the astral world. Ubik's favorite Saphira design is actually based on a famous painting. That painting is the Garden of Earthly Delights, the masterpiece of Hieronymus Bosch, a Dutch painter active from the late 15th to early 16th century. First, a brief explanation of Bosch. The appeal of Bosch's paintings lies in their superabundant imagery, a fantastical expression employing many metaphors. Although his works may seem unsuited to the church, through his marriage to the daughter of a wealthy family, he belonged to a Christian fraternal organization, worked as a notable citizen, and painted by the fraternity's commission. At the time, when depicting the afterlife, it was customary to hear accounts from people who had had near-death experiences, and to paint based on them. And Bosch's paintings were produced according to that method. The purpose of this method was to correct conduct in this life by portraying how miserable an afterlife awaited those who committed various wrongs. Even so, Bosch's mode of expression is extremely imaginative. He uses various metaphors and symbols, such as pigs dressed in monastic robes and creative otherworldly beings, and succeeds in producing works that even today are uniquely fantastic. Today, he is even called a progenitor of surrealism, later famous for Salvador Dali, Giorgio de Chirico, and Jan Schwankmajer. He also, through that mode of expression, produced satires of church officials themselves. Led by Philip II of Spain, royals and nobles across Europe were great fans and collectors of Bosch, and for that reason, the Prado Museum in Spain today holds the largest number of his works. Now let me explain the Garden of Earthly Delights. It is a triptych. The right panel provides the model for Ubik's imagery at the time of the great roar of the astral world. The central panel is the largest, and the work opens like a three-way mirror. When closed, the outside surfaces also form a painting. There we see an image representing the whole world from an era when the flat Earth theory was believed both religiously and popularly. A terrestrial plane lies in the center of a sphere, and the upper half of the sphere presumably represents the sky. The small figure in the upper left is said to be God. Opening the work, the narrative begins at the left of the three parts. The left panel depicts the Garden of Eden. God, who looks like Christ, is creating Eve, Adam's wife, from Adam's rib. The bright pink tower-like form above represents the Tree of Life. The fruiting tree to its right is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, with the serpent, who later tempts Eve, coiled around its trunk. Next, the central panel. It is astonishing. As with the Garden of Eden panel, its colors are vivid, the use of color flamboyant, the primaries conspicuous. Hard to believe it was painted over 500 years ago. There are naked men and women, animals, and various fruits. At first glance, it is hard to make sense of it. If you are curious, please look it up for more detail. It is an amazing worldview. The central panel is said to represent the pleasures and depravity of this world. The various creatures and fruits are said to represent objects of human desire. Yet even among scholars, the details remain unclear. It is a mysterious work with ample room for imagination. Finally, the right panel depicts hell, which serves as the model for Ubik's worldview. It shows people who succumbed to pleasure and desire being tormented after death. Many instruments appear. In medieval Christianity, music was thought to lead people to vice, so the instruments are depicted as tools of torture. The most conspicuous central figure is a monster, part human, part egg, and part tree. Some have said the face may be Bosch's self-portrait. The eggshell torso is said to be a kind of bar. It is also interesting that those inflicting torment on humans are without exception animals. Perhaps it is because humans killed and preyed upon so many animals in life. Next, let us compare Bosch's hellscape in The Garden of Earthly Delights with Ubik's hellscape. Looking at the composition of Ubik's hellscape, one first notices that symbolic expression seems little used. In the foreground, otherworldly beings march. Shorter characters, medium, taller, or riding something. Monstrous figures proceeding in a procession. It gives the impression of a hyakuyaggyo. There are no signs of humans being tortured here. There is a person pierced by an arrow, but rather than punishment, the stronger impression is of having been captured by astral beings. From the composition, one can see that it simply arranges the many variations of characters in an easy-to-understand way. In short, there is no admonition to people of the present world as found in Bosch's hellscape. Above appears Bosch's most striking creature, the one with wooden legs, an eggshell torso, and a human head, with Ubik placed within it. In Bosch's version, a waiter holds a barrel inside the shell, with something like a carafe on the table, so it is read as a bar. If there is a religious admonition, it may be a warning against gluttony and drunkenness. In contrast, in Ubik's case, there is nothing on the table and no barrels. Here again, it seems the intention was not to attach the meaning of a warning against binge eating or drinking. Moreover, the sky is crowded with many flying demons. This is clearly different from Bosch's picture. In Bosch's hell, the upper area shows what looks like an army marching, and towers like city walls belching smoke, which seems to represent the folly of humans at war. Ubik's hellscape likewise lacks admonition. In other words, it lacks the "this is what happens when you do bad things" feeling expressed in Bosch's painting, instead expressing the offbeat amusement and variety of otherworldly characters, the chaotic fun. From the above, if we choose words that leave an impression of Ubik, they would be clown, chaos, that is, increasing entropy, and artistry. And since he induces reincarnation by showing Griffith a vision, deceiver or swindler also apply. In the second half, using these as hints, I would like to delve into the story of his human days. In the latter half on Ubik, I will go full throttle with my imagination. The life of Ubik. Hundreds of years after Old Midland sank beneath the earth, the world was still an unstable era of proliferating small states. Among them, nations began to appear that unified their people by relying on the power of a monotheism administered by the Holy See, which had arisen as a new religion and was steadily gaining strength. The country where Ubik was born was one of them. That nation settled its long war with the upstart neighbor Midland and at last reached a ceasefire. He was born into a powerful merchant lineage within that country, which held financial sway over nobles and greatly supported the Holy See with its wealth. Ubik was the youngest of 11 siblings and was doted upon by much older brothers and sisters. Raised without want in affluence, he was curious about everything from an early age, going around asking the adults about whatever puzzled him. Thanks to his family's ties to the Holy See and the nobility, he could access books and documents beyond the reach of common children. In this way, Ubik formed his distinctive character. By the time he was old enough to be aware, he was far more mature than his peers and, naturally, exceptionally bright. Because of that, he did not fit in, suffered nasty bullying, and rarely went out, spending his days at home reading the books his parents brought him one after another. The one thing that gave him peace was to expand various fantasies using the knowledge he had accumulated and to build stories. After his siblings fell asleep, Ubik would work alone by candlelight. His stories ranged from childlike fantasy to very cruel tales. Thus he began, naturally, to walk the path of a playwright. At 17, through his father's introduction, Ubik became an apprentice to a playwright. The playwright was supported by the Holy See and had the largest troupe in the city. The stories, of course, were about the god revered by the Holy See and his miracles to win more believers. From early on, his master noticed him, and soon he was entrusted with structuring parts of the plays. Because the first parts he handled earned excellent praise, he was given more and more. Gradually, Ubik set his sights even higher. Since he could only create works praising divine miracles, he faced the dilemma of being unable to write the scripts he envisioned. He wanted to write greater scripts that would make ordinary people laugh and weep from the heart. Yet, under the current backing of the Holy See, that was impossible. With that in mind, Ubik decided to go independent. When he told his master, the master, though regretful, respected his decision and handed Ubik a pendant like a red face as a token of thanks so far. Although he had gone independent, he was still unknown as a writer, and at that time, there were not yet theater companies run by common people. Ubik would continue his creative work as the in-house writer for a traveling troupe of performers. However, it was never the kind of income that could keep the whole troupe fed. When he was hard up for food, he went out to take work away from the troupe, and when he returned, he would find that the leader had skipped town in the night, and so on. He spent a stretch of unhappy, ill-starred days. Born into a wealthy family and free to immerse himself as he pleased in worlds of imagination, Ubik, ironically, ended up experiencing the very real hardships that ordinary people feel, all in the course of pursuing his dream. That experience would later give his works a powerful sense of reality. And then, strange things slowly began to happen around him. Ubik began to sense the presence of beings from another world, presences that until then had existed only within his act of creating stories. This experience granted him still greater imaginative power and added new color to his works. 6 years later, in a prosperous core city, the first small theater owned by a merchant was built. When Ubik submitted his play to a call for new works, his script was accepted almost immediately. Before long, his plays began to be performed regularly in that small theater. Unlike the predictable, harmonious works he once created for the Holy See, these new stories were bold and unexpected. Their originality moved many people's hearts. Ubik's talent began to flourish rapidly. Among his growing list of works was one titled The Skull Knight in the Dark Night. It combined eerie, gothic fantasy with finely drawn psychological expression and became an unprecedented hit. Word of its success reached deep inside the royal court. The kingdom, seeing the scale of his influence, decided to support Ubik as a national project. Granted a grand theater by the state and given a generous supply of funding, Ubik gained the freedom to create productions on an even larger scale. Inside the theater he designed, a variety of mechanical tricks were installed to achieve special effects. Flames, drifting smoke, and at times, even the firing of mock cannons. His shows grew increasingly spectacular. The high level of entertainment drew attention beyond national borders. Audiences began to cross countries just to see his performances, and the economic impact became remarkable. With every work he produced becoming a major success, Ubik impressed the king greatly. At a gathering of rulers from neighboring nations, the king decided to hold a grand banquet while they watched one of Ubik's plays in his theater. He requested Ubik to create a new kind of entertainment, something more magnificent than anyone had ever seen. Ubik accepted the offer and resolved to produce the largest scale work of his career. He gathered numerous actors from far and wide and began production on a massive, special effects-filled spectacle. On the day of the banquet, as the afternoon sun began to sink, leaders of many nations and a vast audience watched in breathless anticipation as the performance began. Mysterious beings of another world flew across the stage, while goddesses and fairies appeared from clouds of smoke, a fantasy performance in Ubik's signature style. Then came a great war among humans, monsters, gods, and sorcerers, woven with romance, betrayal, intrigue, and cruel sacrifices. The scale and dramatic depth were unlike anything seen before, and the audience was completely swept away. They gasped at every movement of the protagonist, whistled and cheered in excitement. The entire theater roared with enthusiasm. The king, delighted by the reaction of his guests, was fully satisfied. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. As the story neared its end, the sun began to dim strangely in the evening sky. Just as the play was reaching its grand climax, something completely unexpected happened. The actor playing the protagonist suddenly went off script and began saying something outrageous. To everyone's shock, he declared on stage that Ubik's work was plagiarism, that it had been stolen from a script he once wrote together with his former master. What? That was my script. How could something I created be called plagiarism? Ubik protested desperately, but the actor went on to accuse him further. This play, filled with demons and beings from another world, is blasphemy against God. Ubik has sold his soul to the devil. Behind the scenes, the truth was far more sinister. Members of the Holy See who had long resented Ubik's success had secretly conspired with his former master, who was consumed by jealousy. Together, they plotted to bring about his downfall. From the edge of the audience, that same master watched the chaos unfold, smirking. The actor's accusation was entirely baseless, but the grand performance, attended by kings and nobles from across the lands, collapsed into a complete disaster. Enraged, the king rose to his feet. "Ubik, you have shamed me before my guests at this sacred feast." That single line sealed Ubik's fate. He was sentenced to execution on the spot. On stage, he was bound to a pillar, firewood stacked at his feet, the flames ready to be lit. The audience was thrown into chaos. Some screamed and cheered wildly, others burst into tears. It was pandemonium. As the fire began to rise around him, Ubik cried out through tears of blood, "Oh, how absurd!" This is the unimaginable reality of this world. Fact truly is stranger than fiction. If only I had more life left, I would turn even this agony into a story. At that moment, the pendant on his chest began to tremble violently. And that is the story that leads to the eclipse. So, what do you think? In my interpretation, during Ubik's reincarnation at the eclipse, everyone present in the theater was sacrificed. Because of that, the royal bloodline was wiped out entirely. The kingdom fell into ruin and was eventually absorbed by the neighboring upstart nation of Midland. From there, Midland's power grew stronger and stronger. That's the epilogue I imagine. From the earlier discussion, I came up with the idea that Ubik, in his human life, might have been an artist, a creator of stage plays. He had always carried the image of the deceiver or the trickster, and perhaps that role of manipulating people's hearts through stories was something he continued to embody after his reincarnation as one of the God Hand. His tendency to create works that exposed the absurdities and cruelties of reality reflects the same kind of disorderly artistry found in Philip K. Dick's Ubik and Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. Ubik's final words echo that nature, the curiosity of an artist who can even find fascination in his own despair. Just like how Femto's reincarnation during the eclipse was interrupted when the Skull Knight saved Guts and Casca, a twist Ubik himself would have found deeply amusing. I can easily imagine him laughing at his own destruction, turning even tragedy into inspiration. It might seem unnecessary to explain all this after telling the story, but I wanted to make sure the reasoning behind it was clear, since I imagine some people might be wondering how I arrived at this version of events. Thank you very much for watching.